Our speaker is Kristin Mickelson from Arizona State University, United States. Today, she presents her talk on the topic, Baby Makes Three: How Marital Love Changes During Transition to Parenthood. Kristin Mickelson is a professor of psychology at Arizona State University in the School of Social and Behavioral Sciences. Her research is interdisciplinary with special emphases on social and health psychology. Her work examines the role of stressors and psychosocial factors on relationship functioning and health. She recently published her first book with Springer Nature titled Gender and the Transition to Parenthood: Understanding the ABCs. Today, she will give a talk on the topic, Baby Makes Three: How Marital Love Changes During Transition to Parenthood.
Hi, my name is Kristin Mickelson, and I'm a social health psychologist from Arizona State University. Most of my research focuses on social relationships and health, and for the past 15 or so years, I've been studying the transition to parenthood. We all know about the transition to parenthood. How many of you have experienced it personally? How many of you are parents here or about to be a parent? I see someone back there. So we know that becoming a parent does change our relationship and with our partner, and hopefully, missing that one. There are many ways in which having a baby impacts the marital or partner relationship. These are just a few quotes. The one that I do want to emphasize is the one by Nora Ephron, who, if you're a romantic comedy fan, she's one of the main writers and directors of romantic comedies. She says that when you have a baby, you set off an explosion in your marriage. And when the dust settles, your marriage is different from what it was. Not better necessarily, not worse necessarily, but different. This is what I've been studying for the last decade and a half or so. And most of the research within social psychology really looks at declines in relationship satisfaction. So if at first glance the news does appear bleak, 1 out of 5 couples break up within the first year after the transition to parenthood. This is married or cohabiting couples. Additionally, numerous psychological and sociological studies have shown that relationship quality and satisfaction deteriorates after that transition to parenthood. And this deterioration is greater than what you see in non-parent couples across a similar time period. However, not all new parents experience declines in relationship satisfaction. There's been a number of research studies recently, including one of my own, that shows that a good majority of the parents, both fathers and mothers, only experience moderate declines, with a small subsample experiencing steep declines and some experiencing no declines at all. From that, I was interested in understanding, because this is the love conference, does it extrapolate to love? Does it generalize to feelings of love? We know relationship satisfaction is and quality is often related with that, but not 100% overlapping. So I was interested in understanding what the research says about feelings of love across the transition. And after doing a lot of research, I kind of came up with the question of, like, where is the love in this research? And I'm not going to read the full quote by Houston, but this kind of encapsulates my feeling after doing a lot of literature review within the psychological and sociological literature, is that most research on marriage has focused primarily on satisfaction. The roots of other attitudes and beliefs, such as how spouses a sense of trust, love, or respect develop in marriage, are poorly understood. So surprisingly, not a lot of research focuses specifically on that question of love and how your feelings of love change across the transition to parenthood. Some say they're assessing love, but in fact, they're usually operationalizing it in various ways, sort of as Victor said at the beginning of the conference today. How are we conceptualizing it? How are we operationalizing it? So Belsky and Rovine is one example. They used a scale that assesses a variety of aspects, but only one question that asks about love specifically. Even in my own recent book, Gender and the Transition to Parenthood, from 2023, when I was preparing for this talk, I'm like, how many times did I actually mention love in that book? And I only mentioned it twice. So I am as guilty as the other researchers are in doing this. So I was hoping to rectify that. So before I get to my study and what I found, I wanted to just very briefly talk about what research has talked about with men and women, men versus women in love. So research has consistently shown within the psychological and sociological literature that men and women experience love differently. Men tend to emphasize more the sexual aspects, women the more emotional aspects. But interestingly, men tend to fall in love more quickly and romanticize love more than women do. A study by Schoenfeld and colleagues in 2012 looked at displays of marital love within husbands and wives. One way in which both men and husbands and wives similarly display it is through affection, signs of affection. However, other ways that men display it are initiating sex, sharing leisure activities, and doing household work together. Whereas for women, in addition to signs of affection, it is by enacting less negative or antagonistic behaviors, which I thought was quite interesting. And these displays are actually very salient for the transition to parenthood. So I thought that this was really relevant for my own research within it. In terms of the factors I'm going to be looking at, I'm looking at mental health, interpersonal, so that's between the partners, and intrapersonal, that's within the individuals. In terms of making predictions or hypotheses about it and about differences between new mothers and new fathers, I really focused primarily on the interpersonal versus intrapersonal. Based on prior research, women tend to be more relationship oriented, which suggests that possibly those interpersonal factors might be more primary predictors of their changing feelings of love across the transition. Whereas for fathers, they tend to be more, men tend to be more agentic. So maybe the intrapersonal factors might be more primary predictors of those changing feelings. I made no differential prediction about mental health. So my study is the Baby Time study, that stands for Baby Transitions and Marital Exchanges. I interviewed 104 heterosexual married and cohabiting couples in the United States at 4 time points. Third trimester of pregnancy, 1 month, 4 months, and 9 months postpartum. These were first babies, so no adopted, no stepchildren or foster children, they're very first children. This was a very homogeneous sample, middle class, upper middle class, well-educated, all married or cohabiting. So in looking through my survey that I did, I only had one item that also asked about love, very face valid question, but it was an interesting one because it was a comparison question. It was, how much do you love your partner compared to other couples, from much less to much more? And this was asked at each wave of the study. I looked at anxiety, depression, and positive affect as the components of mental health. Intrapersonal factors were parenting, self-efficacy, self-esteem, and daily stress. And then interpersonal were communal coping, how they cope together as a couple, spousal support, both positive and negative, and then sexual satisfaction and behaviors. So I know this is a very interdisciplinary group, so rather than throwing up a bunch of numbers at you, I thought that I would talk about it more narratively, my results. So the first one is just simply that measure, that one item measure at each time point. And as you can see, there were no gender differences on the changes in love from the 3rd trimester to the 9 months postpartum, but both men and women significantly declined in their feelings or comparison of love to other couples across that transition. The mothers seemed to show a more immediate decline from 1 month postpartum through 9 months, whereas the fathers seemed to show it a little bit later, around the 4-month postpartum period. So from that, I decided to create 3 groups, taking the prenatal and the 9-month postpartum scores, and if they declined from their prenatal to 9 month, they were put in the decline group, stable in the stable group, and then increase in the increase group. So this kind of goes to that bleak sort of a little bit, that very few increased in their feelings of love, but pretty much 50-50 in terms of decline versus stability. And again, no difference between mothers and fathers. So I looked at a variety of characteristics, as I said, and again, I'm kind of going to go through this a little quickly and then I can start summarize in the discussion. But there was only one thing related to increase for mothers or fathers, and this is the only sociodemographic variable that was even marginally related, and that was that older fathers were slightly more likely to be in the increased group than the other groups. In terms of mental health, depression and affect were related at each wave for fathers, and it was related to being more likely to be in the decline group, whereas for mothers, only positive affect of the 9-month postpartum was related to that. Lower self-esteem for fathers were more likely to be in the decline group, but that wasn't as significant for moms. Daily stressors was significant for both mothers and fathers, such that those that reported more daily stress at 9 months were more likely to be in the decline group. Less parenting efficacy or lower parenting efficacy for moms only in the decline. And then positive support was related for both mothers and fathers. This one I thought was interesting. I had a variety of measures of sexual behaviors and satisfaction. So for fathers that reported being less satisfied with sex, more arguing about sex, and less satisfied with their spouse's body at 9 months postpartum, they were more likely to be in the decline group. Whereas for women or mothers, it was only more arguing about sex and reporting fewer dates with their spouse. They were more likely to be in the decline group. And then lastly, more communal coping was related to being more stable. I also did a multi-level modeling, which allows for assessing within and between person changes in that feeling of love. So again, this is a more nuanced way of doing the analysis when you have longitudinal data. Not surprisingly, I found that both mothers and fathers showed significant within-person variation of those across those waves, and it was a significant and negative relationship across time. I also did finally a lagged analysis, seeing whether or not their prior factors predicted their next wave of feelings of love. And what I found for fathers and mothers was this really interesting mirror effect. So for fathers, it was how much their wives were stressed at the prior wave predicted his lower level of feeling of love at the next wave. Whereas for moms, it was her own feeling. So the wife's feelings of love predicted the husband's decline as well as the wife's decline. On the reverse, it was parenting efficacy. So the husband's report of parenting efficacy at a prior wave impacted both his and his wife's feelings of love at the next wave. This was an interesting and unexpected result in that it predicted a decrease in feelings of love. I have some ideas about it, and if we have time, I'm happy to share that with you. And then lastly, only for moms, positive support from their spouse at a prior wave predicted an increase of love at the next wave. So in accordance with other research, I have found that there were moderate declines. Roughly half of new parents did remain stable in their feelings of love across the transition to parenthood. Mothers showed that steady and immediate. Fathers showed a little bit more of a delay. And mothers' group membership was really primarily related to interpersonal and intrapersonal, where fathers had a broader spectrum. So I will conclude it there, and happy to answer any questions.
And thank you very much. You really kept your time. That's great. But you've been doing all this research at different points of time, so yes. One can understand. Yep. So with this, we'll have the floor open for comments and questions. And I can already see there's, please come. Yeah, you can.
I can repeat the question if you want.
Yeah, you can repeat.
They had a project before of having a baby or not, because I think sometimes it can also affect the
So do you mean like if they plan to have the baby?
Yes, if they have the project.
Yeah.
Or not. I've done research on assisted medical procreation, and sometimes it seems that the project is the woman's project.
Yeah.
But not the man.
Right.
So sometimes also it affects their relation. So do you you have the essence?
So I looked at planned versus unplanned pregnancy. That was the closest I had, and it was marginal for fathers, but it wasn't related at all for mothers. So the unplanned pregnancies were related to very marginally to more declines in love, feelings of love. So yeah, so planned didn't see gender difference. No, no. So yep.
Yes. So, excuse me, could you come here? So, so those who are not present physically here.
That way you don't have to like.
So once again, for the online people, that was an amazing study. Was it already published somewhere?
Yes, I have several articles published off of it, and then the book that just came out last year is primarily on that study.
Wonderful. I'm going to read it, hopefully. But my question is, did you check if the love was directed towards the child, so that, less here, more towards the child, like the
Right.
bucket of love?
Yeah, it's like it's a zero-sum game kind of thing. Yes. So we didn't ask specifically about feelings of love towards the child, because this was really the early transition to parenthood. There is a lot of research that does suggest that one of the reasons that the relationship changes over time after that transition is because the mother is focusing a lot more of the love and attention and time onto the baby as opposed to the husband. And so, yeah, I definitely think that would be an interesting thing to follow up on and ask about that question as well and throw that in.
There was a question from who? Please come.
Thank you so much for your interesting talk. I was really interested in whether you could comment a little bit more on like power dynamics or gender aspects of relationships, because I noticed a sense of anger in my gut when I read like on the father's side, less satisfied with a spouse's body. And I was wondering whether, for example, in same-sex marriages, where you have like two mothers or two social mothers, if there would be like different expectations and what belief systems of what right you have to expect from your partner are like embedded there.
Yeah.
Thank
yes,
you.
It's a really good point. And in my book, I do have a whole chapter on underrepresented parents and the research on that transition. I also do have an article that I published specifically looking at sexual intimacy using this data set. And yeah, it is a really interesting idea that this is kind of maybe more applicable primarily to heterosexual couples, right? They're especially the thing with the less satisfied with the spouse's body, right? So the woman's body changes after pregnancy, and it's out of her control, right? It's not like Hollywood where these women snap back within like 2 weeks, right? So I do think that is probably more towards the heterosexual. I know from the research that I did look at reviewing on LGBTQ individuals in the transition to parenthood, the sexual component was important, but not as much as it was for heterosexual couples. So they didn't experience as much of a decline in sexual satisfaction across the transition that heterosexual couples did. So
I think that's